Gabbard from the University of Memphis.
All right, thank you. So this allows me to talk about two things that I love. Fan identity, kind of that in-group, out-group, included with sport, and then Disney. And as we talked about last night, I'll talk about some of the lessons I learned at the end of all this. But to get started, just to show you why, some of the reasons I'm looking into this, here is a Mickey hat. So Star Wars fan, different Star Wars hat. I had to fold this one up to get it here. There we go. Can't put that one on. And so, I don't know if anybody has seen this hat or knows who this comes from. Figment. So,
Change your imagination.
has anyone ever been to Epcot? This is Figment from Journey into Imagination. Probably my favorite character, and quickly becoming my favorite MCU character. Rocket the raccoon, or Trash Panda, or Bear, or whatever one always calls him. So basically, what we wanted to do was look at the comparison of sport fandom to Disney fandom, because as we're doing, or as the research progresses, we're just starting to look at rivalry, and here's some more images of, this is in my office. Megan can attest to just all the stuff I have, and Target can attest to all the money I've spent on little trinkets there. But we're starting to look at in-group, out-group in different situations. So that could be in sport, that could be in popular culture with something like Disney and Universal Parks. Megan's going to talk about the difference between the comic book genre and Marvel and DC later. We could also be talking about politics. We did something on that when we presented at SMAs last year. And so just starting to look at what in-group and out-group means in different situations and trying to have a comparison of things. So basically what we did, we have 4 or 5 research questions. The first one is specific to sport and Disney. So how do perceptions and behaviors toward rival brands differ in the sport and popular culture genres? And then research question 2 through 5, we looked specifically at Disney and Disney Parks' relationship with Universal Parks and how people perceive those two groups. So the first, how do fan attitudes differ toward Disney Parks and Universal Parks? How does identification, brand identification, influence all the ways that people view Universal Parks and Disney Parks? How do rivalry perceptions and behavior differ between Disney-only fans and Disney sport fans? There's pretty interesting findings there. And then how are rivalry perceptions and behavior influenced by gender and attendance at Disney parks? So briefly, the instrument we used, we had the revised SSIS that we used for sport fans, and then we modified for Disney brand fans. We did the same thing. There's an attitude toward favorite brands and rival brands that we were able to use. The SRFPS, we were able to administer the 4 subscales for sport and then modify for Disney fans. And you can see here, out-group prestige, we actually ended up calling out-group behavior. Out-group sportsmanship, we ended up calling out-group behavior. And then morphing, the same thing we modified for the Disney parks. Now, to explain a little bit more about this, when people took the survey, they were first asked, are you a fan of a sport team? Are you a fan of a Disney team? Or are you a fan of both a sport team and Disney team? So, people who said they were a fan of a sport team only took the survey for the sport team. People who said they were a fan of the Disney parks or Disney brand only took it for Disney. People who said they were a fan of both took both the sport instrument and the Disney instrument. That'll come in handy here in just a little bit. You can see the gender breakdown, the age. I always like giving a range for the age. And then the reliability, the measures were reliable with alpha 0.70 to 0.953. That'll be something that's interesting later. So now we have a choose your own adventure. So do you want me to focus on, do you want me to focus on the Comparison between sport and Disney only? Do you want me to focus on the comparison between Disney and university only, or do you want it all?
We want it all.
You want it all? I gotta be honest, Figment. I didn't think they would want it all, but there we go. Talk fast. All right. So research question 1. I said because we asked people if you're a fan of a Disney park, if you're a fan of sport, or you're a fan of both sport and Disney, we actually needed to do between groups or between subjects and within subjects, okay? So here's the MANOVA here, just a MANOVA because we were testing everything, identification included. You can see what are the significant differences. So people in sport are less positive about their rival team's brand than Disney fans are toward Universal parks, okay? Same thing, sport fans believed their rival fans behaved more poorly than Disney fans believed Universal fans behaved more poorly, And then in sport fans got a greater sense of satisfaction when beating their rival in direct competition than when a Disney fan sees that a Disney park compares favorably to a Universal park. Okay? Extra credit if anybody could tell me why this is up here, Angels in the Outfield, and what famous actor played a minor role in this, minor/major role. So the Anaheim Angels are owned by Disney, right? So they created a movie about this. Matthew McConaughey actually appears in this. He's one of the outfielders. So when we went for within subjects, these results pretty much explain or what we would expect. Sport fans who said they were a fan of both sport and Disney, then they were asked, are you a fan of Disney more or a fan of sport more? So people who were more a fan of sport were more highly identified with sport than Disney, right? People who were more a fan of Disney than sport, more highly identified with Disney than sport. All makes sense, right? So some of the discussion here, or some of the implications here, sport fans you could say are more highly or more identified. Maybe their identification is more central to their self-worth or their being than their Disney parks. You can also look at it and say maybe there's more negativity towards sport than there is in Disney and Universal. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. And some potential reason, if we look at social identity theory and say the groups we identify with say something about us. Well, if you are a fan of a sport team, you're a fan of one team or another. You're not a fan of both two rival teams, right? That's heresy. If you're a fan of Disney parks, you're probably consuming Universal parks as well, okay? If you were to expand that beyond the parks, if you're a fan of the Disney brand, are you only watching ABC or ESPN? No, you're probably watching some Comcast brands as well, right? You're probably watching Fox Sports, you're probably watching NBC, things like that. So getting on to research question 2, to look at the differences between Disney and Universal. We had a t-test showed for Disney fans, their attitude toward Disney was significantly higher than their attitude, or more positive than their attitude toward Universal. Makes sense, right? However, even though they were higher, the attitudes toward Universal parks were still pretty high, all right? That's not what you would see on the sports side. Then we looked at the regression analyses, and this is how brand identification, so using that modified, revised SSIS, how it influenced the different ways people view Disney and the different ways they viewed Universal parks. And so you can see this, it influenced attitude toward Disney, the support of Universal, which this was really interesting. The higher identified a person was with Disney, actually the more willing they were to support Universal parks. So there's something that's pretty interesting there and vastly different from what we see in sport. But then down here, you can also see that the more highly identified someone was with Disney, the more negative they were toward Universal parks, even if their negativity wasn't as great as it would be in the sports setting. Okay. Research question 4 was when we looked at a comparison between Disney-only fans and people who said they were fans of both Disney and sport. Here's something pretty interesting here, and this one we used the Mancova because we used ID as a covariate to test this. So there were significant differences for attitude toward Disney. Disney and sport fans had a higher attitude toward Disney than Disney-only fans. And then you can see for out-group behavior, out-group prestige, glory out of reflective failure, Disney-only fans were actually more negative toward Universal parks than someone who said they were both a fan of Disney and a sport team. So that's really interesting there because, as we said, sport, thank you, possibly causes more negativity. Well, if you are using sport in combination with something else, maybe it actually decreases the negativity you see here, which is practically a pretty cool thing if you're starting to look at how do we decrease animosity between groups? How do we decrease the negative feelings between out-group members? And then the final research question was how are perceptions of the rival team perceptions toward Universal parks and behavior toward Universal parks, how is that impacted by gender and also having attended a Disney park or not attended a Disney park? So gender, obviously, we were able to break down male and female, okay? When we looked at, there were 2 people who didn't answer, so they were removed from the analysis. But when we looked at having attended a park or not, that basically, if you've attended a park one time, you were put into one group. If you had never attended, you were put into another. The things in bold are the differences. So, as we typically see, males are more negative toward their out-group than females. Okay, there's really nothing new there. Having attended a Disney park, interestingly, people who had attended a Disney park had a lower attitude than people who had never attended a Disney park, which, if you think about it, may make a little sense, because if you're anticipating visiting, then when you get there and you see maybe it doesn't live up to your expectations. Typically it does for people, but possibly there are things that happen in that trip that you don't like, so it actually decreases the attitudes that you have. However, people who had attended then were more negative toward Universal than people who had not attended. Just a different way to show different types of identification with the brand. And then males who had attended a park were also more negative toward the Universal brand than females who had attended. So discussion, what does all this mean? And this is I'm a member of a Disney group. That's not gonna work. I'm a member of a Disney group that I play fantasy football in. So my team name is Pan's Dino, so that explains the logo up top. Those are my 2 favorite rides at Disney. So first, the SSIS, the rivalry scales, the Gorfing scale showed reliability in a different setting, in a non-sport setting. Then just to kind of go over a few things, Disney fans view Disney parks more favorably than Universal parks. Definitely makes sense. However, they also viewed Universal parks in a more negative way. Not as negatively, however, as sport fans view their rival teams, which is really, really interesting. Again, as I said, if you're trying to look at different ways to decrease those negative perceptions. Thank you. So where do we go next? It's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, right? So we can start examining rivalry in other settings. So things like Comcast Disney, things like Apple, Samsung, Coke, Pepsi, different alcoholic beverage companies. We can also look particularly at the Disney Universal comparison. This, we collected data from Disney, so it was one way. If we collect from Disney and Universal fans, then we have that comparison between the 2. Look at different Disney brands, not just the parks. So things like Disney Comcast. A story about that, how Comcast actually drove up the price for Disney to be able to acquire Fox. Why did they do that? There's a lot of literature in the rivalry, or a lot of information in the rivalry literature, thank you, that shows why you would want to do that for competitive reasons. Also, was Comcast playing the game because they're later going to make a play for something else, so they want Disney to spend as much money or as much of their resources as they can, so maybe they're not able to compete at a later date. And then different things like looking at the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek fans, the difference between Marvel and DC fans, which Megan will talk about here in just a minute. And then also looking at just kind of a broader Disney project. What does it mean to be a fan of Disney? So the hyperlink down here, I actually am able to teach a class on being a fan of Disney. And so the hyperlink is our YouTube videos what our discussions are in class. If you ever want to watch them, some of them are pretty interesting. And then on a kind of taking this broader perspective, talking to more Disney fans and seeing what it means to be a fan of the brand and kind of how they internalize that. One final note on this, from a perspective of a person who studies basically in-group and out-group and why they don't like each other, it is very refreshing to see that within like the Universal parks and the Disney parks, there's not as much negativity. There may be some negativity, but not as much as in sport. So on a personal level, that makes me feel a little better because I'm used to seeing things like Group A really dislikes Group B. Here, Group A may have a preference toward Object A, but they may also consume Object B because, especially if you're not from Florida, if you're going to Orlando or you're going to Southern California, you're probably consuming both brands while you're there, right? To get your money's worth. So, I know I went over my time, but thanks for letting me speak, and thanks for letting me display all my Disney stuff, or 5% of it.